Hello, my name is Julie Eberhardt, and I decided to do my research paper on the contributing factors related to fetal alcohol syndrome, which is commonly known as FAS. And I wanted to take a closer look specifically at how it is incorporated within Alaskan Native pregnancies. So my reasoning for doing this is that for the past 5 years I've worked for the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District, and I've worked as a teacher's aide within special ed classrooms. Those classrooms have been primarily the extended resources room, which is set up mostly for students with emotionally um, inhibiting issues, otherwise called as OHI usually, which is other health impairments. Also, a lot of those students have been diagnosed as having FAS and various other instances and illnesses that kind of are associated with that. This was a pretty big thing among my students, and so I've already done quite a bit of research on it just to try and better understand the students, but I wanted to take a closer look and see what exactly is going on with the women and why this sort of preventable issue and why this preventable stigma is completely present within many Native communities. Also, last week, or I suppose about a week and a half ago, I traveled to Koyuk, which is just southeast of Nome, and I wanted to be a little bit more prepared as I went into the community. We as in UAF students going on our practicum, were warned to prepare ourselves for some issues that may exist and that might be pretty prominent. Um, and I wanted to just sort of set myself up for that and get myself in the mindset and try and understand what exactly is going on in the community so that I could go with it with a non-judgmental, biased view. Oops, one too soon. I was also interested in learning the women's roles within these communities. It's modern day 2014, so I wanted to check out and see what sort of things women were going through and if these issues were still completely prominent, since a lot of these issues have been discussed in articles that I saw in early 80s, 90s. So the benefit of this sort of topic is that there's a lot of new research out there covering it. It's made a pretty prominent face within our state as well as within the country, and so I was looking forward to looking at some articles that were released in late 2010 and beyond. The wrong way again. Oops, no, that was the right way. All right, so as I've already said, I've worked in SPED classrooms before. Again, most of my students were classified as having FAS, while others were just in that OHI category of having physical and emotional abuse that can stem from being in foster homes to just being sort of in a rough situation. The majority of the students that I've worked with have been Native Alaskans. I've worked closely with the A&E tutoring programs and what have you here, both at West Valley and at Lathrop, and I've gotten a little bit more familiar with the sort of integration that goes in with students as they come into these larger areas from smaller communities. Um, Another reasoning why I feel that this is important is that I am a native to Alaska, so this is a pretty big personal issue. I think it's also interesting to look at it from an outsider's view looking in, and I bring up specifically the famous blog that was created by a woman from, maybe Pennsylvania or so, who went to work in Dillingham and wrote a blog and made inappropriate comments toward the members of Dillingham, and as such was more or less forced out of her job there. The one thing that I can relate to is that she refused to take down her blog or to apologize for her inappropriate comments because they were reflecting specifically on the abuses that are going on inside the community, and she wanted to bring awareness to it. So I respect that sort of idea and wanted to look into that a little bit further and understand that these issues are serious and they are definitely present in our communities, and the more we talk about it, hopefully the more that they can be prevented, I suppose. And lastly, I'm working right now on my certification to be a teacher in Alaska, and I anticipate that at some point I'm going to go and work out in the bush community, so I want to prepare myself for that, definitely. The overall view for the paper, I focused a lot on this author. Last name is Tenku. This was some 2009 research, and this was the oldest article that I cited. He went a lot into the effects that FAS can have on students. He spoke specifically, to begin with, about the financial impact that it has on the U.S., so I'll go ahead and talk about that in a bit. Also, some of the other authors also covered some important information on some of the causes for it. As I believe I mentioned before, FAS is 100% preventable, and yet it still occurs rather heavily within the states, and specifically within Alaska. So I wanted to take a look and see why is something still going on if we can definitely prevent it. So I don't necessarily give excuses for any of the women who are making these decisions, but we kind of cover them a little bit more and maybe try and put some sympathy towards them on their issues. The major effects that it has into the nation in general, based on the Tenku article, which again was published in 2009, FAS costs approximately $4 billion per year, and this was specifically talking about the impact on education as well as the impact on our society in whole, meaning the contributions that children with FAS can contribute and how much time, effort, and medical expenses are put into supporting these sorts of children. Over a lifetime, it's estimated, again from the Tenku article, that about $2 million is spent per kid per lifetime. The lifetime expectancy was not outlined, but it also didn't say that it was shorter than, or any research that I found didn't say that a child with FAS is going to have a shorter life expectancy. So my best guess is that we're still talking early 70s or so for a life. But again, I don't have any definitive answers on that, which was a little frustrating and vague. The major causes of SAS, well, there's intentionally drinking, even if it's just a little bit during pregnancy. So there's always that nice wives' tale or wives' advice that it's okay to have a glass of wine occasionally when you're pregnant. But the research that I had found through many of the different authors specifically said, even if it's just a little, don't do it at all, because every sip that you take increases your chances of having your baby develop FAS, and that feels like a pretty common, obvious sort of thing to be saying, but apparently it's something that still needs to be said. Another main point to consider was that a lot of the times, I think I had about 48% of the time that children are diagnosed as having FAS, the mother claims that they did not know that they were pregnant, and so they were unintentionally drinking during their pregnancy. This is especially dangerous during the early times of the pregnancy when the fetus is still forming and is incredibly fragile. So it was advising that a good note is if you are intending to be pregnant or if you are anywhere near the capabilities of having a child, or if you're participating in any form of intercourse, then you need to definitely avoid any sort of drinking because even a little can do a lot. And ultimately, I keep repeating it because I think it's so important. This syndrome is completely preventable, and all it takes is not drinking. So one of the biggest issues or biggest questions that I had to ask is, why do this? If it's preventable, then what is the issue that's holding it back? One of the articles really pushed some heavy ideas on how there's a lack of awareness or education within many of the Native communities, specifically regarding this issue. Another article had stated that that is definitely not the issue, that we're in this day and age that people know. Technology is incredible and can spread lots of information, including the things that you should and should not do during important life changes, such as being pregnant. So I didn't really agree with the lack of awareness or education. Perhaps I felt it was a little bit more of an excuse that would be befitting of earlier times, maybe even 10, 15 years ago. By this day and age, it seems almost like it's not a valid excuse. Just with my experience in Koyuk, which is a community of about 300 people, I think it was up to 350. We were in the classrooms with smart boards, we had full Wi-Fi capacity, cell phone coverage within the community. GCI covers major communities at this point. I feel that yes, there are communities that are still disconnected, but there are many that are not. And I would be interested in seeing the type of percentages of babies with FAS in communities that are pretty developed. Another cause, and that I think I like to tend to agree with a little bit more, is that pregnancy obviously can result from sexual assault as well. And this varies within the community by of whom the activity is taking place. So sexual assault can lead to an unwanted pregnancy, which can lead to a lot of emotional damage and some alcoholic abuse. It's also important to note that within some Native communities, alcoholism is a major issue, and that can lead to a lot of poor choices on many people's ends, not just pregnant women. Another article had mentioned the irreparable soul wound. We had talked about this earlier in the semester in previous discussions, and I liked kind of seeing this information come up again. It helped to reinforce those ideas. So, with this soul wound, this kind of claimed that a lot of the abuses are caused from some historical damage that has happened in generations before within the community or within the tribe itself. So I found this pretty interesting. I didn't feel that this was necessarily an excuse as much as the lack of awareness and education had sort of been outlined or discussed. And this one seemed to be perhaps some sort of rationale that you could not necessarily pinpoint, but that more or less made some sense. It also insinuated that perhaps some of the abuses were maybe intentional as sort of a retaliation or a I don't even know how I would explain it. Sort of a retaliation against the knowledge that is presented to the community by the outsiders, as maybe saying that there's too much involvement and too much interference by outsiders within going into the community, and that nobody is going to change anyone's viewpoint because they don't necessarily understand. So this was an interesting article that I would definitely look into a little bit more. Ultimately, I feel that it was a pretty interesting topic to cover. I feel a little bit more educated with the topic in general, and feel that I hope that I can carry some information onto my future classrooms and and being able to better understand not only my students but sort of their background, where they're coming from, as well as their parents, and perhaps take a better look, at least a non-biased look at understanding that perhaps it's not necessarily the pregnant mother's decision at the time of her pregnancy to withhold from or to abstain from consuming alcohol, and maybe there are some greater issues at hand. So I found it to be a pretty interesting topic that hopefully has permanently changed my outlook at least a little bit. So if you have any questions or comments, please contact me. And otherwise, I thank you very much for listening and watching, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.